You are listening to 95.7 FM WELT, Fort Wayne, Radioactive. The opinions and views expressed in this show are those of the hosts and guests only. They do not represent those of FreeThought Fort Wayne, WELT, or any other organization. Welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour, where we explore science, religion, culture, ethics, and community from the humanist perspective. Join us as we discuss those topics and more, free from the ideologies of religion and superstition.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Hoosier Humanist Hour. The Hoosier Humanist Hour is a show dedicated to discussions on all things humanism, but really we'll talk about just about anything, so long as we can discuss it from the humanist perspective. My name's Caleb. I'm joined today by V. V and I are joined by a very special guest today, Victoria Gibson. Victoria Gibson's here to talk with us today about misogyny, of all things. In particular, I believe that she's of the opinion that there's some sort of scourge of misogyny within humanist and atheist ranks. We'll see. I'm willing to hear her out on this. This is something that intrigues me greatly. But before we begin, I want to go ahead and introduce Victoria. Victoria is most proud of being a humanist celebrant. In other words, she can wed people if she so desires, and if people ask her to. She's been doing that for about 3 years now. And in fact, she's actually one of the original founders of the FreeThought Fort Wayne that we know and love today. In fact, I believe she mentioned that she was one of the first 7 to really get that ball rolling. So we're happy to have her here, and very grateful for your contributions there. Also, just to throw this in there as well, she was an American Red Cross worker for several years. In fact, she says that she's been to help with Katrina and Rita, among other things as well. So she's got quite a few interesting stories to tell, I'm sure. Let's just go ahead and jump right into this. Victoria, we're here today to talk about misogyny, and from what I understand, we're particularly interested in misogyny within humanist and atheist circles. So where would you like to begin with this conversation exactly?
Well, thank you, Caleb. First of all, I just want to make a small correction.
Sure.
I used to serve on the board of FreeThought Fort Wayne, but I no longer serve on the board, but I'm still very active with that organization. So in deference to the current board, I didn't want to anyone that I was serving on the board longer. And I may again at some future date, but currently I'm not on their board.
Okay. My apologies.
No, that's quite all right. I think I'd like to begin for our listeners to describe a definition of what I mean by misogyny. I think that's kind of important that everybody understands that we're all talking about the same thing. Basically, I think misogyny is a hatred or a contempt or even a prejudice against women and girls. It can be manifested in numerous ways, including social exclusion or sex discrimination or hostility, general patriarchy, promoting male privilege or belittling women in some fashion, certainly violence against females, and sexual objectification, where you're making them a sexual object, is another form of misogyny. And misogyny can be found written in sacred texts of various religions and mythologies and various influential Western philosophies as well. And, there's been some talk about what even causes misogynistic behavior and speech. And one thing that I found interesting was an article that I read by a researcher by the name of Barrett Brogard. She's a professor and director of the Brogard Lab for Multi-Sensory Research at the University of Miami. I would like to see more research on her theory, but what she's saying is she thinks hatred towards women or contempt towards women is formed in men very early in their life, and she believes it's often as a result of a trauma involving a female figure, someone that they trusted, such as a mother who may have been abusive or negligent, or a sister or a teacher or a girlfriend, someone that has emotionally harmed them in some way. And I'd like to see more concrete research on that, but that's certainly an interesting theory. And then, of course, there's always the thought that it's caused by teachings and environmental influences on boys and men. So the verdict is still out as to what causes
What
men
do
and
you
boys.
mean by environmental influences?
Socialization is I think what I mean by environment. If a young boy has had male influences that reinforces those ideas or teachings that it's okay to belittle women or to treat them with misogynistic behavior, it could be learned behavior. And here again, the research isn't totally out on that, but socialization, they think, may play into it too, and not just emotional trauma.
Well, Victoria, to your point, I mean, I can definitely see how some of that behavior is learned. I mean, I think as a society, our norms of behavior have evolved over the decades, and very few people at all paid attention to misogyny, to misogynistic tendencies, to any of that just a few decades ago. I mean, it wasn't that long ago when women couldn't even vote, so they were considered a second-class citizen. You find in religion a lot of teachings that are very anti-woman, and if you're not forced by external society, even if you lose your religion, you may still maintain some of those behaviors. I mean, I have not really any evidence for that, but I can definitely see how those things can be linked there.
Well, and that's something to think about with, like you say, people who've come out of religion and have moved into either the humanist or atheist community. That doesn't mean that they don't still have some of those influences from a previous life where they were very much entrenched in a religious community. But there are, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there are misogynistic behaviors that are exhibited by men who have never come out of religion, that they were raised in a secular home. So, but here again, I think some of that can come from our greater society. And I think that's why it's important to have this discussion, because with our new administration and with the president that we have now making some very blunt and crude remarks about women and made some very horrible misogynistic comments, and some of his comments inspired a little pink hat that was worn at the Women's March, and it was sort of to basically say you can't be grabbing parts of female anatomy.
Right.
And he's and our political environment right now, I think, is trying to normalize misogynistic behavior and giving the message that if our political leaders, whether it be the president or others in Washington, who don't seem to value women's bodies or women's rights, that it's scary to me as a woman that we might be normalizing this kind of behavior and even legislating some misogynistic ideas concerning women and women's bodies. So I think it's very important to have this discussion.
I just wanted to kind of spitball a little bit. You're saying that it's the trend that people are trying to normalize, or at least there is a trend, that people are trying to normalize misogynistic behavior. But wouldn't it be fair to say that historically the norm has been misogyny, left and right, rampant as far as the eye can see? So it would be more accurate to say that more people are trying to pull away from the historic norm? Because I mean, the way that I see it, I mean, I don't really see how legislatively or really even socially there's more misogyny now than there ever has been or has been in recent years. I'm seeing a constant trend in my mind, and mind you, I'm coming at this from a biased angle. I'm a man. I don't know what it's like to walk in women's shoes. But, as far as I could tell, it doesn't seem to be getting any worse. And in fact, it seems to be consistently getting better to me.
From a female standpoint, I guess I would have to disagree.
Okay.
And here's why. Yes, misogynistic thoughts and behavior have always been there, whether they have been under the surface and not blatant, or whether they have been very much out in the open. Like in the 50s and 60s, it was much more open. But we went through a period of time, I think, where we were trying to give the message, especially with law enforcement, when it comes to things like rape and domestic violence and sexual assault. We were trying to turn those things around and say, no, those behaviors are not acceptable. Law enforcement is going to finally start listening to women and taking it seriously. We were hoping the courts would start taking it seriously. But I'm afraid we have come into a period of time where we're starting to slip back down that slope. Let me give you some examples. And let me just throw a few stats out there. And this doesn't necessarily have to do with the humanist community. It has to do with the greater American culture. Currently, these stats just blow my mind. Currently, 1 in 5 women, according to numerous studies and surveys, say that they have been sexually assaulted. Wow. 1 in 5. Wow. That means when you're sitting at work at a break table or in a cafeteria, or whether it's students sitting in a large group, that there could be women sitting at that table, more than likely, with those kind of stats, that have experienced, and I'm not talking misogynistic speech, I'm talking assault, that there has been an assault on their bodies against their will. And oftentimes that is rape. So there's an exhaustive government survey on rape and domestic violence that was done by the National Center for Injury and Prevention and Control, which is kind of a subgroup of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. I mean, this is a government agency. This isn't, a bunch of hacks that did this work. And when they found that almost 1 in 5 have been raped in their lifetime, those figures are striking. And that's why I think it's very important. Now, of course, we talked about misogyny isn't just assault, it's also speech and other behaviors. But obviously, we have a problem in this kind of culture of rape when 1 in 5 women have been raped.
No, let me just say something real quick. Does it give you any hope that more and more women are at least able or more willing to come out? I mean, there's, just over the last few weeks, we've heard so many women, discuss these kind of experiences a little more open. I mean, we've seen, women accuse this candidate for senator in Alabama, Roy Moore. We've seen women come out and spoke out against Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey. I've even heard of some women accuse George Bush Sr. of some of this kind of behavior, and it appears that at least there's a little more openness, and women are at least willing to now share a little bit more. There was even that hashtag on Twitter. There was the Me Too kind of campaign where all these women, gathered enough courage to post it on the internet that they've had some kind of event happen to them. Is that maybe like at least the first step towards resolving that kind of culture or these kind of issues, I guess?
Well, here's the thing. I'm going to out myself on radio, which I have never done. I mean, I've got family who doesn't even know this. But I was once a victim of rape in my early 20s.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
And I was not brave enough back then to speak out for myself, although I did, talk to an attorney and tried to get advice from him. And he knew the courts. He had experienced these things as a lawyer, and he knew our courts in this country, and he advised me against it because he explained to me what I would go through in that courtroom, and that the person that did this to me would probably still walk. Our courts are not helping women, and that's why I find it incredibly brave for those who, the few that do decide to speak out. There was an Oscar-nominated film. It was a documentary. It was called The Invisible War. It came out in 2012. And they tell the catastrophic story of sexual assault in the military. Now, we're going to talk about civilian life, too, but let's just talk about military courts for a minute. The film uncovered that the Defense Department estimates that 22,800 violent sex crimes were committed in the military towards women in 1 year alone in 2011.
That's
1 year alone. So not only are military courts failing women, but our civilian courts are failing them too. And let me just give you an example. You got to keep in mind a rape occurs every 2 minutes in the United States, which that's a pretty significant figure.
Yeah.
But it's still scandalously underreported. My own incident was not reported. Over half never get reported. And people might say, well, why is that? Why wouldn't a woman report such a horrible crime? And it's because the criminal justice system is not consistent, and the consequences that they dole out for these perpetrators, with only 3 of every 100 rapists even spending 1 day, they might not only spend 1 day or less in prison.
Well, are we? Hold on. Now I'm confused, and I want to be specific here. Are we talking alleged rapists or convicted rapists?
Well, here again, it can be both, because if only half get reported, obviously that's alleged, because you have to go into a court to prove it, even though the woman knows it happened to her. You still have to go into court. But even the ones who do go into court and they are starting a prosecution because of plea bargains with rape cases, they end up either, well, here, I'll give you an example of a plea bargain case where they did not spend jail time. There was a former Tulane University student accused of raping a fellow student back in 2015. And originally, he received a 2-year sentence, but that was suspended because he had a high-powered legal team, and it was reduced to 2 years probation after he pleaded guilty to 2 lesser crimes. But here's the thing. The 2 lesser crimes that he pleaded to, one of them was an obscenity charge, and the obscenity charge was, I think, a felony, if I'm not mistaken. And then the other charge was a misdemeanor sexual battery charge, which that charge could eventually be expunged from his record as if it never happened. The kicker is that neither charge required the perpetrator to register as a sex offender. And so, here again, I think the legal system is failing women. Yeah, he was a student at Tulane University in New Orleans. Another case was in Steubenville, Ohio, a little closer to us here in Indiana. A girl was gang raped and dragged unconscious from party to party by a group of high school boys. Now here, these were probably minors. The local law enforcement authorities covered up the story because it was ugly and uncomfortable, and they didn't want to talk about it. And the only reason it came to light finally in a New York Times article quite some time afterwards, I think it took several weeks for the media to find out about it, was because there was a blogger by the name of Alexandria Goddard who lived in the area and knew about the incident, and she refused to let the incident be swept under the rug, and so she wrote about it on her blog for several months and before mainstream media picked up on it. Just another case where law enforcement is not handling it the same way that they would if it was some other crime other than a sexual crime against a woman.
Okay. One thing that I wanted to mention, since you brought up that college case, for a long time, colleges have been accused of cover-ups of these kind of crimes.
They're afraid enrollments will go down.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. So they let, campus police handle these things, and they put the entire weight of the school behind covering up most of these, to the point where they'll try to convince a girl that, what happened to her isn't what really happened to her. That they'll try to talk her into thinking that, maybe she is just upset that after that night, like the guy didn't want to date her, or they'll try to muddy the water and like all this stuff to make sure that their stats don't look worse than other schools, because then all these women wouldn't enroll in their college and they would lose money. And I'm pretty sure that both public and private schools are about as guilty on this. And I really find it insane that campus police deals with rape. I mean, who are campus police? What is their training? They don't have the training and expertise that the regular police have, and even that is not always being handled very well. So you could never expect that the campus police guys would handle these cases as needed. So yeah, that happens.
Well, and not only do you have the plea bargains, which don't provide these women protection or justice, especially when they don't even have to register as a sex offender for rape, for crying out loud, because they plea bargain and they plead to lesser charges in Nebraska in 2008. But this case is very similar to other cases in how judges handle the courtroom in a rape case. The judges sometimes fail to protect women when the judge would not allow the victim to use words like rape when she describes her story on the witness stand. She's not allowed to use the word sexual assault or the word assailant or describe herself as a victim in any way during her testimony. Well, if that was a case about someone being robbed or theft, the judge wouldn't tell the victim on the witness stand they couldn't use the word theft or robbery. But they treat women differently when it comes to sexual assault and rape in the courtroom. Well, it's very hard for a woman to be an effective witness to defend herself when she can't even use the very language that she needs to use to describe what happened to her.
Why would the judge not allow that word to be used? That's very strange.
Well, because they think that using that language would prejudice the jury.
Oh.
Because we have, the system in our country that, you're perceived as innocent until proven guilty. But I think they've taken it a step too far in protecting the perpetrator when it's difficult for the victim to describe their story without using certain words, which also means that they keep interrupting her testimony. If they say, strike that from the record, or you can't use that word, and then she has to start over. Well, if you keep getting interrupted so many times, and it's so stressful because you're in the courtroom with your perpetrator, you're looking right at them in the courtroom. It's very nerve-wracking as it is to be in that same room with the person who's done this to you, and then have the judge, keep interrupting you and telling you can't use this word, you can't use that word. It makes it very hard for her to even give an effective testimony in her own defense.
Yeah, and I would imagine, as you're giving that testimony, you're reliving that experience first of all, which is so traumatic, and you're trying to think of the proper language to use and dealing with the system and all that. I can imagine how that would be extremely stressful and difficult to do. Man.
Well, I mean, let's just be. Let's just. I don't know. I'm trying to toe the line here. One, to keep it provocative, and two, because I really want to learn what's going on here. I'm really interested in this particular subject. I mean, this is horrific, don't get me wrong, but what could we, as an activist movement, or any other body that stands as an activist movement, what do you recommend that they do in order to resolve issues like this? I mean, it sounds to me like we're having issues where, because of the sensitive nature of the case and due to the fact that it's very difficult sometimes to prove rape, we have certain stipulations in line that seem to hinder women's rights insofar as being a witness for themselves and being able to give accurate and whole testimony, to be able to provide all the necessary evidence and so forth. But what are we supposed to do about this? I mean, this is beyond me. I mean, this is so far over my head. I don't know what to do.
Well, for example, if men see that the courts, refuse to prosecute, or they're not taking these charges seriously, or these men, don't do jail time, or they get lesser charges, or worse yet, they walk because the victim is not able to adequately give her testimony in court, then that gives a very strong message to men who might perform these kinds of horrendous acts towards women, that our society is kind of going, wink, wink, it's okay, guys, you're just one of the boys, and it's all right. And there are some people who make comments like, well, if you're going to get raped, you might as well just lay back and enjoy it, if it's going to happen anyway. I mean, we have those kind of attitudes out there that they just do not take this violation seriously. And I think as far as legislation goes, and I do think in order for the courts to be strengthened, we need to see more women in government, where there's more women getting to vote at the state level and also at the federal level, because some laws concerning sexual assault and rape are handled at the state level. And when you look at our state houses across the country, when you look at our federal government, when you look at Congress, how few women hold seats of power to vote on things that would strengthen laws that would protect women. So I don't see us changing in the very near future unless we start recognizing that there are talented women who could be voted into office.
Okay, that I absolutely agree with. I mean, I've been saying for a while, well, in private anyway, that there need to be more women in office. Period. This has been a problem forever, as far as I'm concerned. It's slowly getting better. I mean, not too long ago, we recently had a non-precedented event. There was I think it was a governor or a mayor that was elected that was transgender, first one of its kind. I mean, I don't think that's ever happened in this country. So that's a huge event. So there are waves of change coming, and I think that with that wave, we're going to see more women in office. But I'm really kind of curious specifically in court cases what it is that you wish to provide for women that give them a better fighting chance.
Well, I think it would require some major changes in state laws from state to state. And if you look at, start comparing various states and their laws concerning what they consider a sexual assault, there's some wide variation in how they even define sexual assault as far as in the law. I mean, yeah, there's dictionary definitions, but when it comes to the law, they have their own set of definitions of at what point is someone going to be charged for a sexual assault. These are not controlled through the federal government, they're controlled through state laws. And you would need to compare these laws and figure out a way to strengthen laws that protect women. And it would literally have to be done state by state.
And if I can add something to that right there, it's not just strengthening the laws, but actually the police need to do their job. Just a few months ago, when I was reading all these articles about all these rape kits piling up at various police stations, and the labs not having the funds to process all of them, and sometimes taking years for a rape kit to be processed, which may be the only evidence in some cases to prove who was the rapist.
Exactly.
Like, that woman is clearly been raped. She has gone through violence. You can see it. She's been beat up. There's all kinds of physical evidence, and the DNA from that rape kit can conclusively prove, beyond reasonable doubt, who committed this, and all these kits are sitting not being processed. I think police need to also investigate things. Sometimes a rape kit may not have been done on time for various reasons. These things need to be done in a very timely manner, and they need to investigate these crimes a little bit more, as if they were, like the serious crime that, for example, rape is.
They have the DNA tools now,
Yes.
but like you say, if they sit around in some closet and not being processed, I even question after a certain point that they no longer can be processed because there's probably like an expiration on whether the integrity of the test is any good anymore if it ages out, if it gets old. I'd have to investigate that, but it certainly begs the question in my mind. And the event that happened to me years ago, we didn't even have the option of DNA. So can you imagine how much less these cases were prosecuted when a woman didn't even have a DNA to help her with the prosecution?
I mean, I would guess at that point in time, it's a little bit of a he said, she said type of situation, which may be very hard to prove.
Yep, that's why they went unprocessed, and why it was so terrible for women to even attempt to prosecute, because the other trend was to, by the defense, of course, the defense attorney is trying to earn his dime, and he's going to go in and try to paint her out as that she was consented to the act, or that she was an unsavory woman or a slut. They would try to really tarnish the character of the woman. And the other issue is, too, even if they successfully prosecute a rapist, if he does any kind of jail time at all, one thing that I would like to see happen in the court systems is that he has to somehow recompense her, because oftentimes these women have to go through therapy. This just doesn't go away overnight when the court case is over with or after the deed is done. Some of these women suffer for years and have years of expenses with therapy to try and get into a whole place in their life, to be whole again in some way, or to find coping skills to deal with what happened to her, and also to have normal relationships with a loving male after an event like that. I mean, these women really suffer, and nowhere in the court system do I ever see that there's anything done to help pay for therapeutic treatment for these women. It's very sad, very sad.
Yeah. I just hope they don't get any advice on that from the Bible, because we know what that says, and it's not good.
Well, and here's the thing. We all know that churches have had problems, particularly the Catholic Church, but they certainly are not the only ones. I don't want to just single out the Catholic Church.
Of course.
But other religions have had difficulty with clergy or Sunday school teachers who have stepped over boundaries with girls and women, and even some boys. Even some boys have been accosted by clergy and churches. So, it's important that any organization have self-examination and, be checking on themselves and their people within their organization. But I think it's also important for we as humanists to also do some self-examination about where we're at with this issue with our own people. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit.
Of course, yeah. Let's go into that. Yeah.
Let's drill on down to our own community. I don't want to say that this is a widespread problem, but it's definitely there, and it shouldn't be surprising that it's there, because in any human society, wherever there's problems, you're going to have those same problems in all walks of life, and we are not exempt in the secular community. And where they're finding that there's the biggest problem is when women attend conferences and meetups, because currently, as you gentlemen already know, we women are still in the minority in the secular community. There's far more males within the ranks of humanists and atheists and agnostics than there are women. So when women go to these various meetups and conferences around the country, they are also in the minority there. And there have been stories of women being accosted in elevators at conferences and rude things said to them. But with social media, it's really come to a head, because when women dare, you talked about women speaking out and being more vocal about calling men out on rude behaviors or sexual assault. But here's the thing, with social media, the trend now has been when women try to defend themselves or call these behaviors out on social media, they get attacked, and they get viciously attacked. And there was an expose written by Mark Oppenheimer, who writes for BuzzFeed and others, and he did a wonderful expose where he interviewed several women who have suffered at the hands of men at some of these secular or free thought conferences and conventions, and they, with unwanted advances in speech and even what I would consider sexual assault. One woman described that there was at the end of the conference day, that they oftentimes they have parties afterwards, and usually there is alcohol involved at these parties. And she started noticing, because I don't want us to get sued, I'm not going to mention who the individual was in this particular case, in case she ever decides to take him to court and prosecute, although she has not done it so far. She noticed that this very well-known person in the free thought community and in the secular and atheist community was starting to refuse his drinks and hiding them and not drinking them while she continued to drink. And she did get drunk. And so she decided, okay, I've had enough to drink. I should leave and go to my hotel room. And oftentimes these conferences are in a convention center where the hotel's attached, to the center. But in this case, this took place out in Vegas, where some of the after parties might not be in the same hotel as the conference. So she was leaving this party to walk back to her hotel, and this person who was hiding his drinks offered to walk her back to her hotel, but instead of walking her back to her hotel room, he walked her back to his. And the long and the short of it is, she said that he raped her or had sex with her when she was drunk and was not able to consent, and found herself later in an elevator where she didn't even know what building or hotel she was in, and she was disoriented. It was not pretty. And when she dared, and her friends dared, to call this person out on it, some of the people within the atheist community, including Dawkins, got on Twitter and just really lambasted her and told her that she shouldn't get drunk, and it was all her fault. But yet, in my mind, of course, this is a woman's perspective. In my mind, someone is drunk, and someone walks up to them and takes their fist and punches them in the face. When the assault is with a fist, just because the other person is drunk, does that make it any less of an assault?
Well, let me throw in something on that analogy. If the person asked to be punched in the face, is it still assault?
If this person didn't ask to have sex.
Well, that's fine. I didn't mean to necessarily compare it to this individual case, but I mean, earlier you had talked, and we kind of brushed over the fact that it's possible to merely claim that you were raped. And don't get me wrong, I think you can be too drunk to consent. I'm just merely playing a devil's advocate here. So I'll just go ahead and finish that question out then. Yeah. Personally, yes, I agree. You can be too drunk to consent, but your analogy to me was kind of iffy, because it's always plausible that a drunk woman could say that she wanted it, and then the guy could say, "Okay, well, game on, cool, let's do this." I can understand how that could be hard to walk away from. Why should we put our foot down and say, even if the woman consents because she was too drunk, this is unacceptable? What I'm getting at isn't necessarily even a legal issue. I'm trying to get you to verbalize exactly why this is morally reprehensible. In other words, I could say that if I watch two drunk dudes, having a conversation, and one says, "Hey, punch me in the face, bro, as hard as you can." I've seen this, by the way. I've seen my Oh, I shouldn't say
Wow.
that. But I've literally seen this happen. People have asked to have been punched in the face. And
Wow.
people are often more than willing to oblige, let me assure you. And in my mind, that is not assault. That's dumb, don't get me wrong, and the guy's going to wake up regretting that. But I don't necessarily feel that the person who threw that swing should be convicted of assault, per se. Now, if he overdid it, obviously, yeah, if he like crushed an eye socket or, dislocated his jaw, something crazy, sure. But, if he's out and he's got a headache and a ringer, he had a bad day. So why couldn't we say that because this woman agreed at the time, she woke up the next morning with a headache and had a, quote, bad day, why that is assault, where, you know what I mean? Like, am I making sense here? I'm just trying to get to literally verbalize this.
I'm going to answer your question, but I need to reiterate that this woman said she never consented. I just, in that particular case, but I'm going to follow through with your reasoning here. We are not supposed to shove a legal document, in front of anyone's nose if they are incapacitated in any way. If you sign some contract under duress, or you are not, that document can be considered null and void. Mm-hmm. And that's just legal documents. So, when a couple are together, a man and a woman, and if she is not at her full capacity because she is drunk, a gentleman, even if she said she wanted it, should say, "No, sweetheart, this isn't going to happen tonight."
That's assuming, of course, that that the guy is sober enough to be able to make that judgment himself. Of course.
Yes, and in the case that I was talking about earlier, he had been drinking. Apparently,
I know the case. I think I know exactly what you're talking about because I read about the same case, and allegedly he was completely, or maybe not completely sober, but sober enough to know what he was doing.
And I'm sorry if it made it seem like I was trying to connect the dots with this per se. I was actually trying to run off of your analogy and talk in a broad general sense.
Oh, of course.
I'm sorry if I made it seem as though I was talking about this, because I don't know exactly what you're talking about. This is news to me, and I still don't understand exactly what case you guys are referring to. But, okay, I obviously we were all in consensus here. I just kind of wanted it spelled out, and I think that the legal documentation thing's pretty good. And we can run with that for now, because I kind of want to move on. You had mentioned earlier in your monologue that you say that, in fact, you mentioned this several times. You kept bringing it up. Women are the minority. Women are the minority in this group. Women are the minority in that group. And
well, we are in the secular humanist and atheist community. We very much are, and Pew Research bears that out too. That there are far more men who identify as either atheist or humanist or agnostic than there are women. And even our local meetups, the secular meetups that we have, that it bears that out too, that there are more men than there are women. So nationwide, that seems to be the case. And so that tends to be the case when women attend these free thought and secular conferences too. There's far more men there than there are women.
Sure.
So I actually have the stats right in front of me, so let me just throw these out there. So in the age group of 18 to 29, only 41% of atheists are women. In the age group of 30 to 49, it's 38%. From 50 to 64, it's 15%. And over 65, only 6% of the atheists are women.
Yeah. That sounds pretty accurate to me.
Again, we were putting a lot of emphasis on the fact that, women are the minority in these groups. And I wonder exactly what role you think that's playing insofar as the conversation we're having about misogyny. Do you think that misogyny is preventing these women from wanting or having the ability to join? Are you saying that?
Exactly.
Okay.
There have been women who on social media have talked about going to some of these functions, and then when they have received unwanted advances. And I'm not talking about harmless flirtations. I'm talking about some really blatant, lewd, crude kind of things. And the woman had done nothing to get that. I mean, she didn't try to come on to him. She wasn't. She did nothing to inspire that, I guess, in the man. And so, yeah, when that stuff happens, then it makes women feel like the free thought community is not a comfortable place. And, that's, I guess, what was surprising to me with some of my own experiences with men within our own community. I've had some things said and done towards me, and I'm certainly not, a young chick anymore, and so I'm past a certain age where I don't even expect any men to really make any sort of advances towards me just because of my age. But even so, I've had some things said to me in a secular community, and it just kind of blew my mind, because women like to think that of all places, especially if they came out of religion where they were under a lot of patriarchy and had already experienced misogynistic speech and behaviors from religious communities, they thought if they came into free thought communities and atheist and humanist communities where they profess to be liberal and progressive, promoting equality and social justice, we women thought that we didn't have to deal with those kind of issues anymore. And unfortunately, that just isn't always the case. Me personally, it hasn't happened very often, but there's been 3 occasions where I was really shocked and taken back by some behavior towards me within our community that I wasn't expecting. So I find that sort of unfortunate that women are second guessing being very active in the atheist and humanist and free thought community because they have experienced some of those things. For example, Dawkins, for whatever reason, seems to really go out of his way to attack feminists on Twitter. He's really used that as a vehicle to really speak his mind. And he said some horrible things not too long ago. He was scheduled to be a keynote speaker at a conference for the Northeast Conference on Science and Skepticism, which is abbreviated NECSS. But because he praised a video and also retweeted it on his Twitter account that equated feminism with radical Islam, oh yeah, it was horrible. And NECSS took offense at that, as you might imagine, and so they dropped him as their keynote speaker for that conference. And in their statement, I'm going to read you the statement that they gave to the press. They said, "We believe strongly in freedom of speech and freedom to express unpopular and even offensive views. However, unnecessarily divisive and counterproductive and even hateful speech runs contrary to our mission and the environment that we wish to foster at NECSS." And so they dropped Dawkins. And that's not the first incident with him where he has really belittled women in the feminist community. He's really got a problem with that. I'm not sure why, but it hasn't won him brownie points with women in the free thought and secular community.
Sure. Well, we're running close to the end of our time. I think we got about 10 minutes or so left. By the way, for those of you who might be just joining us, this is the Hoosier Humanist Hour. Today we have Victoria Gibson on the show. We're talking misogyny. I've said, oh gosh, at least 10 times on this show that Dawkins is probably my least favorite of the Horsemen. He's just not my flavor. I'm not a big fan of Dawkins myself. Now, I don't know anything about his views on feminism, nor do I know exactly how, quote, misogynistic, unquote, he might be. But anyway, that aside, I used to consider myself a feminist while I was still trying to figure out who I am, which philosophical paradigm I wanted to use, which worldview, in other words, I wanted to use. When I was still discovering myself, I really thought that I was a feminist for the longest time. I really did. And then I became a humanist, and there were certain things about the extreme left's version of feminism, because, mind you, there are several different variants of feminism. some more benign than others. And I really started seeing a lot of strong left-wing activity and propaganda being tossed around, especially, on social media. You brought up social media for a little bit, which...
The expose I mentioned earlier in this program, written by Mark Oppenheimer for BuzzFeed, when he interviewed some of these women who have pulled away from the humanist and atheist community because of how they've been treated. A couple of the women, their attacks were so vicious on social media because they tried to out some of these incidents that have happened, especially at conferences, that one of the women was so viciously attacked by men on social media for even daring to bring it to the public's eye, that she has been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress syndrome and has spent a lot of time bedridden. And there was another woman who also had suffered emotionally because people are braver on social media. They don't have to look someone in the eyes.
Yes.
So they can be enormously cruel. And these women were afraid that it would go beyond social media, that they might try to, hunt them up or find them. You wonder just how much access people have to your personal information when they're making threats, and some of the threats that these women faced on social media were very violent sounding in nature, and so they were very fearful. But things even less menacing than violence. Let's talk about Hitchens for a minute. He wrote a huge article in Vanity Fair a few years back. Of course, he's passed away now, but he wrote an article, Why Women Aren't Funny. And trust me, the women did not take too kindly to it, especially when he told his reasons why he thought women weren't funny.
Did he actually give... I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean...
Oh, yes, he gave reasons. He said he thought humor was a sign of intelligence, and that he also thought that men don't want women to be funny. So by connection, does he also mean he doesn't think that men want women to be intelligent? It begged the question. He said that women don't want women to be funny. He said we want them to be our audience when we are funny. And then he went on to say that humor was a sign of intelligence. But then he went on to say that he thought women did not have a sense of humor, or they themselves weren't funny, because he says women's bodies are capable of childbirth and child rearing, and that is at the root of why he thinks women have no sense of humor.
That's really interesting. He's basically claiming that men are peacocking and using humor as basically the bright colored feathers, if you will. And women don't need to do that? Is that kind of...
Say that women, because their bodies are capable of childbirth, that in itself makes them not have a sense of humor was just incredible. And then he goes, and then it gets worse. Then he says, I read the article, and then he says, women are partly ruled by the moon and the tides, and they fall more heavily for dreams, crystals, stones, relics, and other things that men know are fit mainly for mockery.
Well, let me throw this out there. I mean, this is so much of a Jekyll and Hyde thing, It's, on the other hand, Hitchens has said that the only thing that can improve the condition in some of the poor parts of the world is the empowerment of women. Like, he said that in open public forums. So this is such a, how do you keep both those concepts in your head is beyond me, I guess.
Well,
it is a puzzle. And, I saw him on a talk show. I think the talk show was in Great Britain, but I saw the video where a female talk show host was talking to him about various topics, and then all of a sudden they were talking about his personal life and the fact that he was married, and it came out in the interview that he said that his wife will never work. He does not want his wife to work, and she pointed out to him that was some very backward thinking, and he just kept reiterating that he was to be the breadwinner and that his wife is not going to work. So,
that's also embedded in women as well, because, you were talking to this as a learned behavior. I very much agree that this, pretty much all of this is learned behavior. I have a friend of mine who is the exact counterpart to what Hitchens is talking about. She wants to be that kept wife who doesn't have to worry about much aside from taking care of husband, house, and home. That's what she wants. She doesn't want or desire much else. She just wants to live a happy life with husband, house, and home, and she doesn't really. That's it. She just wants a man to take care of her. She's very open and honest about that. And I know a lot of women. In fact, my mother is the same way. She's always been a quote. Maybe this is part of the problem. Things like this particular language I'm about to use, but she's a very old-fashioned kind of woman. She that's the environment I grew up in. Mom was always cooking and cleaning and making the meals and asking us about our day, and dads were always out fixing something or working.
Now, see, I see nothing wrong with that arrangement if both parties agree that that's the way it will work for them in their marriage. But for a man to put his foot down and say, my wife will not work, as if she has no option, that's a little bit different.
I've seen that interview that you're referring to where he said that he doesn't want Mrs. Hitchin to work. And when she retorted, he ended up saying that, well, she can work if she wants to. I just don't want her to work. That's what he had said. I do remember that vividly.
That sounds like a different interview than what I had seen. So I would have liked to have heard him say that, actually.
Oh, it's possible. You're right. I did make that assumption that we were talking about the same interview.
See, my concern is when you've got high-profile atheists and humanists. Well, another one, Penn Jillette. He loves when he does not like something, whether it be an article a woman wrote or something she said or her behavior, whatever. When he disagrees with a woman, he has a really nasty habit of calling her a stupid, and then it's a word, I don't know if I can say it on the radio, so I probably shouldn't, but it's a word that describes her genitalia, and it's a very crude word, and he uses it frequently. I mean, you can find it in a lot of things that he says where he calls women a stupid bleep. That's the best way I know how to say it.
I just want to say right here, we're running really close on time, and I have to close this out. I'm sorry to cut you off there.
When anyone, whether it's men or women, use these kinds of abusive language, it speaks volumes about how they potentially could be treated by someone who uses that kind of language, or the lack of respect that they have for you. You know, if a man calls me a stupid whatever, I've got a pretty clear picture that he has absolutely no respect for me.
Mm-hmm.
It speaks not to the word itself, it speaks to the attitude behind it, and how potentially that person may treat me in the future. So, words are very powerful, but even more powerful are the attitudes behind the words.
Victoria, we're wrapping up, and I really wanted to give you an opportunity to take a couple of minutes, if you would like, to go ahead and summarize, sum up, perhaps enlighten us with some more information we don't know, but I just wanted to give you the last couple of minutes to go ahead and shut down the show if you don't mind.
I just want to say that the only reason I brought to light some of these high-profile and famous atheists who have made comments that are disrespectful towards women is that because they are such high-profile men in the atheist and humanist and agnostic community, and so many men look up to them, that here again, we need self-examination within our own community, and we need to say not only to these high-profile individuals, but also all of us in the rank and file of our community that we have to stand our ground and say, no, this is not the kind of community that we want. We want to be a welcoming place for both men and women.
Amen.
Wise final words.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you guys for listening, and I want to thank V and Victoria for being on the show today. I hope you guys were provoked. I hope you guys learned something. I definitely was provoked, and I learned something. I hope it didn't hurt any feelings.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you very much. I hope to have you on again sometime.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
That is all the time we have for you this week. This has been the Hoosier Humanist Hour. Be sure to check out FreeThought Fort Wayne on Facebook and on Meetup.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope your days are filled with logic, reasoning, and the eternal quest for knowledge.